It's funny that where the Prince of Peace was born is one place where, all in all, most of the time, Jewish and Arabs get along together.
There are people, Americans, other countries, just simply afraid to visit Israel despite their religious feelings of it being a beloved place because they don't want to be killed. They don't want to be on a bus and have a bomb go off.
Most of the gifts to humanity, medicine, culture, scriptures, math, science, has come from the 0.2% who are Latter-day Saints, the 0.2% who are Jews. 0.4% has blessed humanity more than all the rest of the world combined. That's the antidote for anti-Semitism.
If I was an anti-Semite, my response would be, that's just braggadocio.
I'm more Jewish now than I was converting to the church.
That's a cool way of looking at it. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Chris Heimerdinger channel. Today is an incredible event. I get to reunite with an old friend who I have known for 20 years, Daniel Rona, and been with him on his brilliant tour in Israel. We also have Stephen Rona, his son, who is actually in Israel and may have heard a few bombs going off over the last couple of weeks. So we're anxious to talk to him. The whole point of this podcast is to reunite with Daniel and the Ronas and with Israel Revealed, which is their company that takes tours and has been offering tours to the best sites. They are Jewish and they are LDS, which is a great combination, an incredible combination for those who are interested in taking a tour of Israel. And Israel Revealed has been a staple of the marketplace for Latter-day Saints who want to visit that country and visit Egypt for many decades. I would like to welcome Stephen Rona, and I would like to welcome his father and my old friend, Daniel Rona. Shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom. And that means peace, and it's used for hello and goodbye. And so we're not saying goodbye yet, though.
Yeah, like aloha, maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
In 1998, I was invited by Daniel to go on a tour of Egypt and Israel, one of the great memories of my life. Right now, Daniel is serving as a missionary on Temple Square, so he's here in America. His son, Stephen, the less gray-haired person on the screen, is running the show for Israel Revealed in Israel. The obvious question on everybody's mind is, I want to ask, how are you, Stephen? How is your family? How is everyone in Israel after this 12-day war, as President Trump calls it?
I'm doing okay. We've had some sleepless nights, but that's the little problem that you can get over. We're doing okay. And it was a nice thing to see yesterday, all the kids going back to school for another 4 days until the school year is over. But it's like they weren't going to give in going back to school. We knew the war was over when kids were back in school.
Well, there's, of course, a lot of talking heads on the media in the United States that want to say there is good evidence to suggest that the war isn't quite over yet. In fact, I was watching a podcast yesterday where they were showing of the Natanz nuclear facility and that it had an underground facility called Pickaxe Mountain, which was totally forgotten by both the Israeli Air Force and by the United States B-2 bombers. Now, maybe in a week, this podcast will become dated because that site will then become bombed. But at least for now, it appears there is a ceasefire, and it seems to be holding, except that there's rumors that Mossad is still in assassination mode in Iran and still taking out a few nuclear scientists and maybe some government leaders. They would obviously love to see regime change. Now, I want to talk about Latter-day Saint subjects, but I at least have to get into what is your opinion politically of what is happening in this Iran-Israel conflict?
The competition or conflict with Iran is over 40 years old. And they definitely did have a nuclear program at whatever stage it was, and I would estimate that with the quality of control that the Israeli Air Force had in Iran and achieved, and the intelligence that has been, their nuclear capability has been degraded. I'm no expert to tell you how much, and I'm sure Israel's not going to publish their intelligence sources or information. But there would not have been a ceasefire if Israel actually felt or knew that that program had not been affected with what's happened in the 12 days.
Since the beginning of mankind, there have been bad people. The Cain and Abel story begins. There's always a conflict. For Latter-day Saints, they've got this wonderful record, the Book of Mormon. I was at a fireside and someone asked me 2 Octobers ago if I was tempted to call Hamas the Gazayantan robbers.
Gadai. Okay.
That in and of itself tells you that there are always bad people. There are always good people, and we will prevail. And so I'm not worried. I think the major political difficulty has been undercut. The people of Iran are very special. They're biblical. We depend on being Israeli because of the history of Persia saving us. Thank you, Cyrus, the biblical personality.
Excellent point. Of course, you're referring to King Cyrus of Persia, Babylon, from the days when Israel was allowed to leave captivity and go back and rebuild the temple and live in Jerusalem.
One thing's for sure, the little people of Israel, they're really small. 0.2% of the population of the world consider themselves somehow ethnically Jewish. That's similar to 0.2% of the population that connect to the Latter-day Saints, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We both call ourselves Israel. We're really a small, tiny portion of humanity that has blessed humanity. Most of the gifts to humanity have come from the Jews and from the Latter-day Saints. So that, to me, overshadows the political challenges, and we will prevail.
Well, we got to hear some anecdotes, some stories about your life over the last 12 days. You're in Jerusalem, correct?
Yes, I am.
So you're not necessarily where the most damage, the most destruction that was caused by Iranian bombs dropped. But nevertheless, what did you experience over the last 12 days?
Well, it seems that Jerusalem probably was not directly targeted. I know Iran did target. Mostly they ended up hitting civilian buildings and population. But I don't think Jerusalem was, but we have quite an effective missile defense system.
I did hear Jerusalem was attacked, but maybe it was successfully defended.
What happens is the fallout from the defense missiles and interceptions can spread over a large area. So Jerusalem did end up going into shelters. While they weren't directly targeted, there was a possibility of interceptor fallout.
Did you have friends or family in other parts of Israel that have some pretty hairy, difficult stories to tell?
Ever so often, the news get just a little bit closer than the television screen. And so as I'm calling people that I knew lived in Beersheba, I ended up calling a person that was in the hospital that was hit, had a angioplasty and a stent put in the day before.
In other words, they were in the hospital.
They were in the hospital when it was hit for a different reason.
For a different reason, but then there were some hits to a hospital in Beersheba. That's what you're talking
luckily, about. the building that was hit was evacuated to the underground units that were put in the day before. And talk about providence.
Think about that.
That whole wing and building was totally empty. when it was hit.
Well, the numbers are still being tallied, but apparently there were 27 casualties. That means people who died. Casualty can refer to anyone who's died or injured. But 27 people killed so far. We would expect the numbers to be more accurate out of Israel, and then over 600 casualties that occurred in Iran, despite the fact that, as you say, Iran was targeting just basic civilian areas. They weren't necessarily going after military targets at all.
At all.
No.
And Israel was very carefully trying to target military compounds and military personnel, nuclear scientists, people who were directly connected to eliminating nuclear weapons in Iran. So that was the difference between the two countries and the approach that they took.
As well as Israel giving pre-warning where were military installations in civilian areas, asking for the civilians to evacuate those specific areas before they were targeted.
I don't know if Iran just doesn't have the technology to direct their weapons just at a power plant or an army depot. They just seemed willy-nilly to send their missiles wherever they thought that it would cause the most damage or the most publicity.
The best way for me to explain it, their purpose was a terror campaign. And so if it's not a military target, then the terror it creates is the mayhem that they were hoping for. And so it's a campaign of terror, not with a specific military target.
Well, I've got to ask you, Daniel, and Stephen as well. You guys run a tour business in Israel. I assume that the tensions that have taken place in the Middle East with October 6th and even prior to that have affected your business quite a bit.
It isn't the first time. COVID can be another example, and other intifadas and other uprisings. Somehow we have survived. Chris, you realize that the holy of the Holy Land will always remain. And there are some people that will offset the earthly challenges because they're seeking, they hunger, they thirst after holiness. It isn't our tour. We think we're good at what we're doing because of our background. The rocks speak. I don't speak rock, but the Savior himself said, if they don't shout, the rocks will. There's a feeling there that people still, we've had more than 100 people in the last year and a half still come to the Holy Land.
So you don't necessarily do the kind of tours you might have done in my day when you could have an office in Utah and attract Latter-day Saints, bring over large groups. Are you mostly doing private tours these days?
That's just the default, of course, where we could easily comfortably handle 1,000 people a year between Stephen and myself. We're handling 100 a year. The point I was making is that there are still some that seek the holy, and that's the reason they're coming, to be close to the Savior's place. Those trees, those rocks. I watch the little children who don't listen, but they feel on tour. They're touched. They're closer.
So it's your belief that these holy sites are providentially protected?
Absolutely. Look at the statistics, and no one's talking about that. We don't hide behind that. We don't advertise that. It's just a known prayerful thing every day. Begins with petition to the Lord, and we redecide. Sometimes we'll adjust the itinerary for reasons we don't know, because the feeling is there. It would be better to go to a different location today.
Adjusting the itinerary because of a spiritual prompting. I think that's cool.
It's humbling.
And that's probably something that makes our program a little bit different than other programs is we actually live in the country. And so besides our spiritual heritage that we have as Latter-day Saints, I speak the language.
You mean Hebrew?
Yeah, Hebrew. And I know the place, and I know the people. and I'll be walking through the old city, and here I am speaking in English to my tourists. Now, obviously, I'm an Israeli, and we have our Arab neighbors in the old city, and we get along wonderfully with each other. We love tourism, and we love going into each other's shops, and we get along. And that's the real message of someone that comes here, is going into Bethlehem. And the people there are so thankful for the tourists that come. And they're thankful for the Jewish people that come with them. We just want to live in peace. And it's funny that where the Prince of Peace was born is one place where, all in all, most of the time, Jewish and Arabs get along together.
Now, when I was there, I noticed that as well, that Arabs who are local, I mean, people need to realize that what percentage of the population of Israel is Arab?
Of Israeli citizens, about 20% are Arab.
So 1 out of 5 people in the whole country of Israel are Arab. That's something I think that many people don't realize. And those who are citizens, they love it there. They love the benefits. But then where do the bad apples come from then? Because they're right next door. They're in Gaza. They're in the West Bank. They're across the border in Lebanon. What explains the divergence of opinion? Because these Arabs are obviously Muslim, many of them, right?
Most.
So they seem to have just a different opinion about whether Israel ought to exist than so many people that might be just beyond the fence line, and obviously who penetrate the borders as well. But I know that Iran funds, and they have many proxies, and they try and stir up trouble. But there seems to be just a general feeling still, after Israel has existed for 75, 80 years, the feeling that Israel should not exist. And that's why people are afraid to visit Israel. You can talk on that. That's important. There are people, Americans, other countries, just simply afraid to visit Israel despite their religious feelings of it being a beloved place, because they don't want to be killed. They don't want to be on a bus and have a bomb go off.
Talking about a campaign of terror. And as I alluded to earlier, Iran definitely motivated from their religious fanaticism were perpetuating a campaign of terror through proxies or directly. But people here, most of the people, Jewish and Arab, simply want to live life, work, raise their children, and get along. And unfortunately, there are a few for their perceived political gain or personal economic gain, whatever the reason is that they're in the business of terrorism.
Well, it's Allah Akbar. It's a passion. It's religious reasons is generally what the world thinks.
It is important to note, though, tourists have not been targeted in Israel as tourists.
Daniel, I can tell you wanted to add to that.
That's really a good point. Very few visitors have been hurt. In fact, as a visitor in the Holy Land, statistically, this is not convincing, but it's true. It's more dangerous in Salt Lake City with the drive-by shootings and the road rage and whatever than it is being hurt by terrorism in Israel.
Well, you know, the viewer is going to say, well, obviously a guy who's running a tourist company
Will say
in
that.
Israel is going to say something like that. But the stats are true that the enemies of Israel don't go after tourists because many Arabs benefit from that industry just as much as Israelis. I guess there have been a few attacks on tourists, but no, mostly that stuff is taking place in non-tourist areas. That's just something that a lot of people who are thinking about going to Israel, I don't want to be a commercial for Israel Revealed, but the fact of the matter is that there's just not a lot of danger when it comes to people visiting the holy sites.
And Chris, if what happens after this is people decide to go to Israel not with Israel Revealed, I'm happy.
No, everybody benefits.
That's right. And if you're coming specifically as a tourist visiting the holy places, you're not going to be a target. And I would recommend you actually come with an organized group and you have a local guide who knows how to get you to the places that are safe. If tourists have been victims here, it's because they were mixing in a regular cafe and not specifically a tourist place.
Well, I still have very clear memories of my visit to Israel, and even in 1998, the checkpoints sometimes were long. You had to wait a long time. I remember when we crossed over from Egypt to come into Israel, I was there on a bus tour. And of course, most of the tourists are senior citizens. I was a young man at the time. And because I was the celebrity guest, having written 10 Issues Among the Nephites and just known as an author, they sort of made me the representative of the group. And what they were all telling me as we were driving up to the Israeli border was, please be really nice and schmooze the soldiers so that they don't make us open up every single suitcase, that they basically can look over the group. It's mostly old people. It's obviously tourists. There's no terrorists on board. So, of course, I approached the soldier, who happened to be one of the most beautiful women that I've ever seen in my life. And she was an Israeli soldier. And so I walk up to her and I say in such sweetness, is it possible that we could just go across the border? Because obviously we're just old people and we're tourists and we have the appearance of being total tourists. So you'll just let us go across without much hassle and we won't waste much time here. And the beautiful young lady looked at me and said, let's unload all the bags and check on them. So we spent a few hours and she made sure that there were absolutely no contraband and no weapons in any of those suitcases. And of course, after a few hours, then we were allowed to pass through. But nevertheless, at certain checkpoints, like driving to Bethlehem, I remember going through a checkpoint where we had to just wait a while. They just waved us on through. So there's definitely a lot of security. But that should make somebody feel more confident in visiting the place because it has the worldwide reputation of being a very dangerous place, full of a lot of unrest. What people need to realize, number one, I love the point that you made that the Lord protects these sacred places. Secondly, Israel goes to a lot of effort to make sure tourism is a big part of their existence, a big industry in that country. One of the biggest, besides flowers, but it's one of the biggest industries in Israel. So the effort that the Israeli government goes to make sure that everyone traveling on the roads, most especially tourists, are very protected and very little chance of having anything go awry.
Israel does take its security very seriously. And unfortunately, the spelling difference between tourist and terrorist is not that big. So
Oh, brother, I never even thought of that.
When they get on the bus, they just want to make sure the spelling is right and that it's tourist and not terrorist, okay?
It isn't so much an economical consideration. There is a willingness, a desire, a hope to share a very precious culture. It's really an old culture. It goes way back. Abraham could have lived yesterday. To him, time was timeless. He could see the beginning from the end. The fact that he lived thousands of years ago is just our difficulty in mortality. So the Israeli, they're not religious. They work at being secular, but there's a covenant feeling there. They're connected and they want to share that. They want to share it as much as Latter-day Saints enjoy sharing their religious feelings and their religious results. It's just on a different scale, but it's more than a business. It's sharing the greatest, oldest culture that we remember.
Well, Daniel, let me get a little bit of your background. Did you convert to the church or were you born in the church?
No, I was a convert. My calling, my wife now has passed away, but about 14 years ago, we got called in the church history department, and we ended up in the last half a dozen years updating the history of the church in Israel.
How many members are in Israel?
Stephen, you're one of the branch presidents.
Just over 250.
In the entire country, because they still don't encourage proselyting.
No, that's...
Although proselyting is not illegal in Israel, and that may be a misconception that some Latter-day Saints have. It is highly inappropriate, as historically converting Jews was an act of anti-Semitism. And so although it's not illegal, the church definitely is not anti-Semitic. So the church does not do any missionary work or proselyting in Israel.
And the other Arab countries in the area.
Other Arab countries in the area also discourage proselyting.
The church does not.
They
Church does
discourage,
not.
but the church is
Right. I understand that. In fact, we all feel like the second coming cannot occur until the gospel is preached throughout the earth. And so those countries that resist missionaries or proselyting or any of that kind of activity, that means that the Savior can't come yet.
Or we are not ready to help those people understand the gospel in their lingo.
What do you mean by that? That's an interesting statement. We are not ready. Are you talking about the church itself is that we're not ready for the second coming?
That's right. And I will use a personal story that I alluded to as we started our broadcast. I think you were craving a pizza at the hotel.
Oh, yes. I wanted a pizza. I remember.
And ordered a cheese pizza.
Because, I better explain this if you're not going to explain it, you can't mix cheese and meat in Israel. They encourage you to keep the old law of Moses, and you don't mix cheese and meat products. So I could not have pepperoni on my pizza. I could have pineapple. I love pineapple on pizza, but I could not have pepperoni. Couldn't have sausage. Not going to happen.
And the humor of the situation was that the Arab waiters had to break the dishes so that they would never be used again because they became unkosher. So here you have a mixture of Arab protecting the Jews who are not religious, who are protecting an old religious word of wisdom. That's the dichotomy, the humor, the contrasts of the Holy Land.
Well, what have you heard during this 12-day war about activities that might be taking place at the BYU extension in Jerusalem, or just any way in which the war might have affected active Latter-day Saints in the area?
Luckily for the students, they were actually on their scheduled excursion to Greece when this all started.
Interesting. So they weren't able to return to the country.
I'm going to imagine that in the next few days, if things stay the way they are, they'll probably end up coming back. I don't know what the logistics are or whatever, but I think that was another act of providence.
There were no bombs that dropped on the Mount of Olives or in the Jerusalem area.
You know what? I think the Jerusalem Center is one of the safest places to be in the country.
Yeah, for spiritual reasons.
Even without that, just the facilities they have there. There's only about 90 students, but it was built to house up to 180. It has bomb shelters, besides it being a steel reinforced concrete building in and of itself.
Now, I did not know that.
And so if I could choose where to be in the country, that's where I would be.
At the BYU Jerusalem Center.
And not only because of its spiritual protection.
Has there been any interruption of activity at the BYU Jerusalem Center October 6th? Anything of that nature?
The program was halted for a period of time.
Do you know how long?
Just over a year. It's either 3 or 4 semester programs that did not operate.
Well, let me ask you this. What is the feeling on the ground among the normal populace of Israel with regard to the ceasefire? Do they feel a sense of confidence? I know you mentioned the school children going back to school and that itself is an indication of confidence. However, that's only 4 days and then they're out for summer vacation anyway. What is the feeling on the street? Do they think that this conflict is over, or do they think there might be a couple more hitches that need to be dealt with?
Most of people in Israel are doubtful anything will flare up with Iran. I think Israel has been about as successful in their campaign against terror and the nuclear program as could be. So there's not going to be any added benefit of carrying that on. Would we like to see a regime change in Iran? Yes, but that's not something that is Israel's responsibility to make happen. Would we like Persia to grow and flourish again? Yes, we would. We owe them a debt of bringing our people back home from millennia ago. There was the day the ceasefire was called and the regulations were the same as if when the missiles were about to come and you had to stay close to your shelters and not go to work and all of that. And there was a point where it was possibly
Okay,
not.
I'm hearing a police siren. Is that in Salt Lake City or in Israel?
That's just outside in Jerusalem.
Okay. Well, there's police sirens no matter where you are.
That one's not police. That's an ambulance.
An ambulance. Okay.
Yep.
But no bombs dropped near you.
No.
Nothing exploded in Jerusalem. There were some barrages, but the defense systems there in Jerusalem took care of that.
Yeah.
We always wonder, this is kind of a touchy subject, and you guys are probably not going to talk about it because it's not something that somebody who is an Israeli citizen, especially running a tour company in Israel, is going to talk about. But it's the imagination of Latter-day Saints and Christians that the only way that there's going to be a rebuilding of the temple is going to be if Arabs drop their own bombs accidentally on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's sort of what we thought, well, that could happen, especially with a country like Iran and their ability to direct where the fire is going.
My thought, the first temple in Jerusalem was not built by King David, even though he wanted to. The message from the prophet Nathan was, you're a man of blood, of war. And it had to wait till his son Solomon. And Solomon in Hebrew is Shlomo, which is the same word as shalom, peace. And so temples of the Lord are built in a peaceful process.
That was well said. And our belief is that he will triumph. He is the King of Kings. His name is Shalom. That's my greeting. Every time we meet, it's Shalom. And I know it's the Lord's name, and I never take it in vain, and it gives me peace. And so Stephen's explanation is spot on. The temple will be rebuilt miraculously, but it will be a time of shalom.
A time of peace. Speaking of October 6th, getting back into the nitty-gritty of the topic, did either of you have friends, acquaintances, or direct relations with those activities and that terrible terrorist attack?
I was in the country on the 7th of October when it started.
Did I say October 6th?
You said the 6th.
Americans get confused. Anyway, political stuff. October 7th.
October 7th. And so it was talk about jaw-dropping to see the news and what's happening. It took a while to get over it. I didn't have directly any friends or family involved. I do know people who had friends. Okay, so I don't have it one step away. I have it 2 steps away.
Well, Stephen, we've got relatives. My nephews, your cousins, served a couple of times in
reserves, and that's
they've been called up, though.
Yeah, they've been called
yes,
up.
They were.
As a result, and yes, and that I do have firsthand friends that are involved. It's been going on for over a year and a half. Everyone in Israel has someone.
There are still ongoing military activities that are happening in Gaza and in Lebanon. Is that true?
In Gaza.
They're still mopping up.
Yeah.
How long do you think that process will take? What does the news tell you in Israel about how long that process might take before it is brought to a peaceful conclusion?
It goes in waves, and so we're probably in a momentum of ceasefires being brokered. We're probably somewhat optimistic that something may come through, but we've been through about 4 or 5 of these processes where it has and then it hasn't, and it has and it hasn't. So
one question I think a lot of Americans have, and one that we want to ask, is how come Gaza has caused such problems and there was an uprising in Gaza? Why aren't we experiencing a similar uprising in the West Bank?
It comes down to, number one, the Arabs that are in the so-called West Bank under Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is interested in controlling terrorism and maintaining their life and identity in their areas. And the people don't want to have this awful influence of Hamas and terrorism.
So in general, there's not near as much security
No.
blocking off the West Bank as there was. The Gaza Strip was sort of the Wild West. I mean, that was definitely a dangerous area where the normal Jewish people would rarely ever go because it was just too dangerous. But the West Bank does not have that designation.
And Israel totally disconnected from the Gaza Strip in 2005. 2007, Hamas, which is a terrorist organization funded by Iran, ousted the Palestinian Authority out of Gaza and turned it into a terror. That's their whole purpose.
So in essence, the reason that they're so different is because they are literally governed by a different body.
Same as Iran.
Same as Iran. In other words, the proxies aren't active in the West Bank.
No, they're not.
Chris, there's an answer that I'll share. It's very personal. Stephen's mother, my sweet wife, as I said about 7 months ago, transitioned over to the other side, but 5 children, and all of our children served in the military. And she, as a mother in Israel, we lived there, we moved there 50 years ago. I was born there, of course. She was quite concerned about the difficulty for the Arabs and the Jews and the mayhem and the hurt, the wars. And she took it to prayer, and she was quite beautifully surprised when it's as if the Lord were speaking to her, said, "You take care of your world, and I'll take care of mine." And so we don't have answers. We don't have world answers. I get more comfort following the Lord's promptings than attempting to figure out mankind's machinations and efforts. So that's just one of the legacies that dear Marilyn gave us. You worry about your world, I'll worry about mine.
You know, there is in the United States a lot of sentiment among certain media personalities and individuals who want to feel they're pro-Jew. They love the Jewish people, but they're really anti-Israel. They hate Bibi Netanyahu. They hate the Israeli government. I personally have a difficult time separating the two, but many of them are able to do that quite easily. How do you respond to some of the anti-Jewish, anti-Israel activity that's occurring not only in the United States, but in Europe?
I just have to look at the United Nations. If you look at the number of resolutions in the General Assembly of the United Nations that deal with Israel, they are more than all other resolutions of all other countries combined.
Why do you think that is?
Trying to find a logical, sane reason to explain anti-Semitism. I don't have a sane, logical reason to explain how systemic and prevalent anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish sentiment has been through the centuries. But because I cannot find a logical reason is not proof that anti-Semitism does not exist, because anti-Semitism is real.
Your thoughts on that, Daniel?
Yes, I'm in the throes with Robert Hatch and Robert Starling of putting together a TV series showing the antidote to anti-Semitism. And the truth is that most of the gifts to humanity, medicine, culture, scriptures, math, science, has come from the smallest portion, the 0.2% who are Latter-day Saints, the 0.2% who are Jews. 0.4% has blessed humanity more than all the rest of the world combined. Put that with your figure, Stephen. That's the antidote for anti-Semitism. And what we talk about happens. That's a God-given gift. So we need to talk more about the accomplishments, the gifts to humanity to offset the made-up, hateful rhetoric.
Well, if I was an anti-Semite, my response would be, that's just braggadocio. We can talk about all of the great accomplishments and isolate, blah, 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 of any people. We all know, I mean, being a part of this culture and you being a part of both cultures, we both know that the adversary has a hand at that.
Yeah.
And he is definitely motivated to stir up trouble, and he is very successful at doing so. And I assume he will continue to be successful until the second coming, until the Savior comes again.
Good point.
Well, I'm going to try one more time, Daniel. Tell me what brought you, a Jew born in Israel, to join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
I was born in 1941 because my father, and separately, who became my mother, had escaped Nazi Germany and felt that they needed to come home to what was still called Palestine. That was a region, and Palestinians were the Jews. Wow, have things changed. My father married. I was born. The marriage didn't work out. He had a sister who survived the Holocaust and had escaped to Cuba and then to New York, and he decided to go to New York. We lived there, and his dilemma was this terrible disaster that's happening, ethnic disaster. Where is God? Where was the warning? Where were the prophets? Aren't we people of the prophets? He found the answer in a synagogue that was being used by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Manhattan Ward was meeting in an erstwhile synagogue, and when he heard the story of a prophet, he knew instantly it was correct.
A spiritual prompting.
And said at that first meeting, I was a little 6.5, 7-year-old, he said, I'll become a member of your church. And I recall the bishop saying, well, that's wonderful, but you need to prepare yourself. And most Latter-day Saints would think, oh, well, then he has to go through the disciplines of health and tithings and
living the word of wisdom, etc.
The prepare yourself was, that wise bishop said, make sure that this is the religion that your forefathers had. You are not being converted. You are returning to your erstwhile faith. It just happens to be that the word repent in Hebrew is the same word as return. He was baptized, and then it would not allow me at 8 years of age to be baptized. I got mad, and Jewish blood boils at a different temperature. So I insisted to my bishop that I wanted to be baptized. And when I was ready, and it was very wise of my father, I had my own witness, my own testimony. Then he baptized me in the Salt Lake Tabernacle. So that's the story of my conversion. I relearned my Judaism, not academically. It's part of the heart. It's part of the dam. Dam is the word for blood. It's a DNA kind of thing. And I realize, possibly more than most people I know, this is the original religion that has been restored. And so I'm happy being a Jew because I'm more Jewish now than I was converting to the church.
That's a cool way of looking at it. Well, let me ask you one final question, and I'll let you both answer. What do you foresee for your business? Do you have people lined up now? After this war is now concluded, you probably have clients, customers who were probably wanting to go on tour. I assume you're getting phone calls from a few of those people saying, are you ready to let me go on my tour? Is that sort of thing happening?
Yeah, and I would imagine the day or two more of ceasefire will solidify that. People who have postponed travel will start to travel. Usually people travel, make their decisions about 4 to 6 months out. So I'm going to see business in 4 to 6 months being wonderful. We just got to get through the 4 months.
We got to get through the 4 months. Excellent point. Last point that you want to make, Daniel?
Let's go back to the Holy Land. The Holy is still there. No one can take it away.
Well, you two and your families have definitely been literally under the gun for the last 10 days and for many years. There is a lot of drama regarding the Middle East in the United States amongst all of the news organizations. And we can definitely get the wrong impression. We feel like everyone is on pins and needles every hour of the day in Israel. And it's interesting to talk to somebody who is a citizen and an occupant to tell you that that's not necessarily how their daily lives operate. Well, I want to thank you both for joining me. I was trying to, in my mind, imagine who could I possibly talk to that would have direct experience in current events that are happening around the world. And Daniel Rona came to my mind. I'm glad to meet you, Stephen, and hope that we can establish a long-term friendship. I wish you both the best. Good luck with your mission, Daniel. And I hope that soon you're able to safely return to your home country where you're a citizen.
Thank you.
Be well and shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
Those who have attended this podcast, thank you for joining us on the Chris Heimerdinger channel. We'll see you again next week.